Oh, the joys of beekeeping. This video is not for you guys that have 50 plus hives or are looking to build a large apiary. This video is for you guys that are in the same boat with me and that you are starting out from scratch. I just got a phone call from the place that I ordered my package of bees from, saying that they're going to be delayed 3 weeks, and instead of picking them up at the end of March, they won't be ready until mid-April. And this is a huge setback for a package of bees and for a lot of beekeepers. This is actually a really tough time to get into beekeeping, it seems like. Even when I got started 10 years ago, it wasn't this difficult. What's going on is there is just this cold weather down south that has delayed the rearing of drones, the male bees. Without the male bees, there's not going to be any queen breeding, and without the creation of queens, you don't have any queens to put in packages, thus packages aren't ready. And onto that, this huge decline of honeybee colonies within a lot of the commercial apiaries. They're reporting record high colony collapses, and a big reason why they think this is happening is because of resistance to treatments from the varroa mite, or at the very least, high varroa mite levels. So if you are like me and you are picking up a package of bees and you want your bees to be healthy and you want to help them grow, I'm going to talk about what we can do as beekeepers not so that we have these huge apiaries and we're just maximizing honey production and acting like a commercial operation, but so that we can just help our bees be healthy and grow so that they have the resources to bring in as much honey as possible so that they can survive the winter eating as much of the food that nature intended them to eat. Honey, not, you don't have to feed them so much of the synthetic stuff. Here I'm holding what we call a follower board. Some people refer to it as a dummy board. They're actually slightly different, but I'll get into ways we can use this in our hive or a nuke box, checkerboarding, feeding, and varroa mite control during this very early time when you are getting your package of bees. This also can be beneficial for you guys that are getting nukes, but this video is mostly intended for those of you that are getting packages, because packages don't have the bulk and the resources in them already, like a nucleus colony does. Before we get started, don't forget to download my free book, How to Become a Beekeeper. It's got lots of tips and tricks and inspection sheets and feeding guidelines, recipes, all kinds of stuff. Even if you already have your bees, I think you would really find it helpful. As a beekeeper, there are 4 main categories that we're trying to help the bees in. There is the brood, the developing bees. I group the queen into that category. There is food, there's pests, and there's space. A big part of beekeeping that not a lot of people talk about is managing space. You probably know that you can add boxes onto your hive to give the bees more room, and you could take boxes away once the hive gets smaller. But when you're getting a package of bees and it's just such a small amount and there's no comb for them, it can be really helpful to manage the space within your box. So here I have a 10 frame box, which is the size of the beehives that I run are 10 frames, but the bees do not need so much space to start, and it's actually not good for them. They're going to have to use a lot more energy to keep this large space warm, and especially when the queen starts to lay, they're going to need to use even more energy to keep that brood at that nice toasty 92 degrees. They also have a large space to defend against anyone that's going to come to rob them. And so there are 2 different ways that you can help the bees manage the space when they are so small. One way is with a follower board. It is about the size and shape of a frame. Now, there's follower boards and there's dummy boards. They're slightly different but can be used for somewhat the same purposes. A follower board comes all the way down to the sides of the wall in the bottom, and it keeps the bees from being able to access the other area of the hive. When you put the follower board into the hive, you're making the inside of the hive smaller so they can't get to the other areas. Now, a dummy board is like half the size, half the width of a frame, but the size and shape of a frame. This one you'll see is a little bit bigger. So when you are putting your package of bees into the hive, you really don't need to give them more than 5 frames. It can be no foundation with a starter strip, or you can have waxed foundation, double waxed, it's even better. You can make a follower board, and what we're going to do is put all 5 of these frames right against the wall, and we're going to put that follower board or dummy board right here after that. And then if you have some insulation, make sure it's not toxic stuff with dust that's going to harm the bees. But if you have some kind of styrofoam or insulation you used inside your beehive, you can put that here if you like. And you can just fill up the rest of the space with empty frames. It's good to just have them ready and waiting for when you want to move that follower board out. You can very easily. And so that's where you're going to be putting your bees. And you'll see that the bees will start to draw out comb on 1 or 2 of the frames. And once these frames are mostly drawn out and you're finding that the frame is, there's only like maybe say 1 or 2 frames that are empty after a couple weeks, then you can take some empty frames from in here and put them in between your frames of brood. Put 1 empty frame here, put another empty frame in here. So we'll have a frame of comb, an empty frame, some more frames of comb that they're drawing out, maybe another empty frame, another frame of comb, probably honey, and then we'll have our follower board right there. So now we have 7 frames for our bees, and we have some extra empty frames right here. And then as you need to add more empty frames the next week, because this is springtime, so bees are going to be growing pretty fast, you can add more and more frames. And once there's only 1 or 2 empty frames left, take the board out. Once you're adding those final 2 or 3 frames, then you can take the board out. You'll see that there is this gap right here. And so if you're finding that this gap is too big in your box and the bees are building wonky comb and attaching it to other frames or off of your foundation in strange ways, you could take your follower board and put it right here. And this will help keep your frames nice and tight. So the way the follower board works is that it takes up the size and shape of the inside of the box so the bees can't access the other side. The dummy board does not fill up the entire space. It is more the size and shape of a frame. You can use either. The follower board will work best to keep the bees from getting to the other part of the hive and keep that warm air in, but a dummy board is sufficient as well. And when it comes to the fall, when your beehive is getting smaller, it is another time that you can use that follower board to make that hive smaller so they're not using so many resources to keep that space warm as it cools down. But your other option is to use a nuke box. If you have boxes that are falling apart in the corners, or you want to purchase one, want to make one, this holds 5 frames. This really cute nuke box I got with my keeper's hive. And when you get the keeper's hive, it comes with the follower board and these nuke boxes, which is incredibly helpful. And then there is this super cute little nuke box inner cover and a telescoping outer cover. So if you want, you can put your bees in this small nuke box when you get your package and let them start to build that way. And once they've drawn out comb on all of the frames, or at least 4 out of the 5 frames, and there's a good population, then you can move them to your 8 or 10 frame box. And then of course you're going to need that extra box on top to cover your feeder up. So for many people, the follower board is a lot easier option and doesn't require so much extra work. But I will say that When it comes to fall, you're going to sometimes have colonies that are just not that big, and you can successfully overwinter a nuke. And you just can't have them in this huge empty beehive, and you're also going to be wasting a bunch of honey. But what a lot of beekeepers will do with their smaller colonies is overwinter them in a nuke box so that they can properly insulate the hive and it is not too big of a space for them to keep warm. So I just want to add that in because if you think this is going to be a waste of money, it might not necessarily be. The other ways that we're going to help our bees grow, other than managing space, is feeding them. There is that 1-to-1 syrup ratio, and that is by weight or volume, but I go by volume. I usually make about a gallon of it. It's plain white sugar mixed with water, a gallon of water, a gallon of plain white sugar. And then I also feed them pollen. I usually feed them in very small quantities to start, like a half a patty, and then I check on them. It's really helpful to have feeders that are right under the lid, not the frame feeders that go down in the box, so that you can just check on them. You have your inner cover, you can check on the feed without letting a whole bunch of warm air out of the hive if it's a little bit of a cooler day, and not disturbing the bees. I am not a huge advocate of feeding. I will say that I do not think we're always helping them by giving them fake pollen and sugar. We want them to eat honey, but when there's not a lot of honey available, so we don't want them to starve, and we do want them to have the resources to draw out comb, and they do need to consume a lot of nectar in order to secrete wax. And without the wax, there is no honeycomb. Without honeycomb, there's nowhere for the queen to lay. The queen's not laying, the population stays low. So in order to get this whole domino effect started, feeding them pollen and syrup is kind of the start, like you're just knocking over that first domino so that the bees can do the rest. Once you've found this progression going, and you're hanging out outside this hive and you see bees coming and going at the entrance, that is when you know it's time to take this feed away and the bees can do it all on their own. At the very least, when you're adding a second box onto your hive, you want to take that feed away. The next part of helping your bees grow, now this isn't when you first get your bees. Now this is the next step. When you first are getting your package and you're putting them in, you want to limit the space and give them resources, give them some food if necessary. After a few weeks, once you see that the bees are drawing out honeycomb on your frames and the queen is laying in them and you have at least 4 frames of honeycomb drawn out with stuff going on in there, not just empty, that's when you can start to checkerboard. And when you have, say, 4 frames of brood, you have 4 frames of brood, you can take an empty frame, take your 2 frames of brood, pull them apart, and put an empty frame in between 2 frames of brood. How much you could checkerboard really depends on how much brood you have. I don't like to put more than 1 frame of brood, more than 1 empty frame in between 2 frames of brood. I don't like to put too much of a hole in there. The bees do not like that gap in the brood, and they are more inclined to fill that space up faster. You don't have to do this, but especially if you are finding that you just have these empty frames on the side and bees aren't doing anything on them, and you just have some frames of brood, frame or 2 of honey, and then just empty frames, and it's just like never touching it. Take that empty frame out, move your honey to the wall of the beehive, because that's how it goes. The food, the honey, nectar, pollen, that is the wall, the bread of the sandwich, the bookends, however you want to look at it, of the hive. It always starts, it's the insulation of the hive. The first and last frames in your boxes, brood boxes, honey supers, of course, they're always going to have food first and then the brood. It is rare, happens, but it is rare that the first frame of the box is where the brood is. Sometimes when I can't find the queen, I pull out that first frame and I'm like, or I pull out that last frame and I'm like, There she is, taking up that frame that she is almost never on, but so it happens. But usually those first and last frames, maybe one, maybe two of them, are the food, and the inside is the brood. So you take those frames of food and you put them along the wall if they haven't, and you give them a frame of brood, and then you put an empty frame there, and then you have more frames of brood, and say 2 frames of brood, and then an empty frame. And you can checkerboard, so it's a couple frames of brood and empty, couple frames of brood and empty, and that's how you can encourage the bees to build on empty frames within your box and grow horizontally. I found that bees are more inclined to move vertically within the hive, and so that's why then we're adding boxes on top, and the bees will go up there and then build down to the lower section. You really want to be careful with adding that second box on top of your hive. I know you're excited to have the bees grow and you don't want them to swarm off, but if there is room for the bees to draw out comb or somewhere for the queen to lay, it's very unlikely your bees are going to swarm. And adding that box on top when your bees are down here is just giving somewhere for all of that hot air to go. And if it is still below 90 degrees outside, the bees need to keep their brood warm, and you don't want to give them more work to do by having them lose all of the heat to an upper section of the hive where nothing is going on, and for them to constantly have to keep their brood warm down below. Also, if you're still feeding your bees, then you don't want to have this empty box on top of your brood, because then it's going to be harder for them to find the feed and take more work for them just to get to the feed. So what's the point of having it up there? So don't be too quick to add that second box on top until you think that they actually need it. But once it gets warmer out and then it's hot out and the sun's beating down on the hives, putting empty boxes on top, having your honey supers on top is a great way for that heat to go up to the boxes that don't have the brood, so the bees don't have to work so hard fanning down the brood to keep them cool. It's just it's a delicate balance that the bees have within the hive, and it's really important to not be too quick to tell them what to do, because you can give them more work in the process. Like my 3-year-old who thinks she's helping me wash the dishes, but in turn now I have to rewash all the clean ones she just pulled out of the drying rack. And then there is the talk about varroa mites. This year is a weird year. Unfortunately for all of us, it is not a great year to get started with a package. I had a student talk to me. He said that the place he is buying his bees from, his package, recommended that he treat for varroa mites with oxalic acid within the first couple of weeks of getting the bees. If you followed my last video about your first month as a beekeeper, I recommend that you not treat your bees until your hive is at least like 70% drawn out in this first box. And the reason being that just get yourself acquainted with the bees, let them get settled, let them have some brood, because you don't want to disturb them too much. A lot of these treatments are disruptive to the queen's pheromones, and you don't want them to take off, you know, like 2 weeks into having your bees. You have 2 options. If you are comfortable with doing this, then when you pick up your package of bees, this is not the case for nukes. Nukes already have brood, developing bees in them. But if you are just getting a package, then you can either invest in a vaporizer or get the kit with the syringe and put oxalic acid into your hive using the dribble method about 2 weeks into having your bees. You'll see that there will be eggs and larvae present, but the larva isn't being capped yet. So in 2 weeks, that's not going to happen. You're not going to see pupa, but once it's past that 2-week point, depending on how fast it took the bees to start building comb and the queen to start laying, you're going to start to see pupa in the next few days. So you can do that. And this is usually not necessary though, because over 90% of varroa mites in a hive are supposed to be in the pupa, with the pupa in the cells. This is where the females go to have their offspring, and they're feeding off of that pupa. And that's what they're looking for. They're not so much looking for a host to just hang out on. The females are looking to have babies. So having no brood present in this package and no brood then in your hive when you put it into the boxes should be enough to have that hive's varroa mite level so low already. But you know, they're saying that the commercial apiaries are saying that they are having a much higher hive loss than in past years. Beekeepers have 50% or more hives dying, and that they are relating a lot of it to varroa mites. So if that is the case, and you are getting a package from this commercial apiary that is a few states away, and their hives, they're selling bees that have high mite levels in them, then that might be a better way to go if you're comfortable with it. The good news is that if that is too much for you, you would rather just get used to your bees and you don't want to expose yourself. The vaporizer requires you to wear a mask, like a serious mask, so that you are not inhaling the fumes. You are putting in this tool that has a hot metal plate into the hive that is full of beeswax, which is flammable. You do need to be able to connect it to a battery, whether that is a small motorcycle battery you have with you that you're continuing to recharge, or if you have a riding lawnmower or golf cart, you can use that as well. And so it's the dribble method's a little bit better, but it still requires you to wear gloves and a mask and eye protection because it is an acid. So if you're not up for that, which I totally understand, then you can wait until you have at least 6 or 7 frames of drawn out comb. You're gonna have brood present, you're gonna have capped bees, which are the pupa, but that is okay, and you can put in alternative mite treatments. Formic acid is just the one that I don't recommend this time of year because it is a very strong smell. It can mess with the queen's pheromones. It can cause queenlessness as well. And it also is sensitive to temperatures. It's around the 80 Fahrenheit that you don't want to put it in the hive. So if you have like warmer temperatures come that time, you're not going to want to use it. It's better to use later in the year. But you can if you'd like to. Then there is Apogart, which is another great option. There are some temperature restrictions. You just have to really follow the directions well. It is not organic, but it is thymol, which is derived from the thyme plant and is organic in some European countries. That can be put into the hive. It sits in there for weeks, so it will get to the bees as they hatch with mites on them, as well as the already hatched bees that have been walking around. Or you can get oxalic acid strips called Varoxan. And some companies only sell big packages of it for like $70, but there are other companies that sell smaller packages in the like $35, $40 range. And you just have to search around for the one that has the size that you need. And that is an extended release oxalic acid. So that is not something you would put in at the start when there's no pupa present, but you can put it in later on after that you've had the bees for 3+ weeks and you have more frames of brood. Then you can put those in and they will be in for a few weeks and will also get the pupa that are hatching. There are other mite treatments. Some of the other miticides are harsher chemicals that I do not recommend. I don't work with them, and so I'm not going to talk about them. And then there is one mite treatment that I bought and now I'm actually considering not even using it. And that is it uses amitraz. The brand I bought was called Apivar, and it is a super easy treatment. It is really great. It was always my go-to in Hawaii, especially if I had high mite levels. It wasn't something I put in to keep mite levels low. It was something I put in when my hives were doing poorly. And it does not have temperature restrictions. I have never seen the bees dislike it. I have seen the bees react poorly to ApiGuard, to formic acid, to HopGuard. They will move their brood. They can cause queenlessness. I've had hives abscond. But when it comes to Apivar, the bees do not seem to care at all that this exists. It can be right in between the brood. And so in theory, it was a great treatment. But mites have developed a resistance to it, unfortunately. And so personally, one of my theories to why so many beekeepers are losing hives right now is because that is a really commonly used commercial beekeeping treatment. It's something they used a lot in Hawaii. There are a ton of commercial beekeepers on the island I lived in, especially Kona, where I was. That's where Big Island queens and Kona queens are. And overuse of this treatment, I mean, they've known this for many years now. If you overuse this treatment, if you leave it in the hive for too long, if you use it without rotating other treatments, mites develop a resistance to it. And so years ago, I realized that it was not working at all in my beehives, and a lot of beekeepers are finding that to be the case in Hawaii, and they were experiencing really high hive loss. In Hawaii, we don't lose hives like you do in a lot of the mainland. Our bees do not die over winter. What they do is they abscond, or they get taken over by small hive beetles. Either way, there are things that you see causing the death of a hive. Cold, hive beetles, but that's not actually what caused the hive to die. It was the varroa mites that weakened the bees so much they could not handle any other stressing coming their way. It's an important thing to just remember when dealing with varroa mites is that they are often the root cause of the problem. And so I stopped using Apivar, but I was hoping that here in Pennsylvania it was not going to be overused. However, if bees are being trucked up from the southern states where they are now experiencing really high hive losses, it is possible that it is now happening here too. And it's probably not going to work so well with my package of bees coming from Georgia. So my plan is to take the 2 nukes that I got, and I will probably just put the Apivar in there when I, maybe a few weeks into having them, once they've mostly drawn out this bottom box. If the population is high enough and they're growing fast enough, I'll do a mite test first to see if it's necessary. Because these bees are coming locally from a guy who's been beekeeping for decades, and there's a good chance it's not necessary to treat. And if I do treat, I can use a product and just see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then I have time to do something else, like put oxalic acid strips in. Whereas if I do it later in the season, there's not as much time to rebound and try something else if you realize it doesn't work. So I'll probably do the Apivar in the nukes and just see if it worked or if it doesn't work. I don't expect the mite levels to be high there anyway. And then for the package I am receiving, I am actually going to get the oxalic acid dribble kit so that I can try that out. I do have a vaporizer, but I left my mask. I think I threw it away in Hawaii. And so it's actually cheaper to buy the whole dribble kit online, mask and oxalic acid included, than to just buy the mask for the use of my vaporizer. I mean, you get a bunch of uses out of it, but I hate using the vaporizer. And there's a lot more chance for user error with the vaporizer. Thanks for watching. Please leave in the comments if you have other tips or questions about what I talked about. I know this is a little bit, I rambled on at the end, but this is, beekeeping seems to be changing for the good in some ways, and in other ways it's becoming harder. And so next year, if you continue to follow along, I am making it my goal over this winter and next year to really dive deep into treatment-free beekeeping. I already employ a lot of integrated pest management practices so that I do not have to treat so much, and my mite levels are low already, but I really want to talk to as many treatment-free beekeepers as possible because I want to know exactly how many hives do they lose in these practices and what works and what doesn't work and what is a waste of time, so that we can really start to get our bees to the level that they do not need interference by the beekeeper so much. But for this first year that I am back in Pennsylvania and I just want to have some roots down, I just want some bees to start that are surviving a year, I am going to help them with treatments. And then from there, I will grow an apiary, try to get as many swarms as I can, split bees, breed the strong hives so that we can really get to the treatment-free beekeeping that we all want to be at. After all, my apiary is not a commercial apiary. I am never going to be at the point that I have 50, 100, thousands of hives. I ran 25 hives at most by myself, and that was enough for me. Borderline too much. And this is not where I want to be as a beekeeper. And if that is the case for you, then I hope you join me as we get down to the bottom of this and we learn how to help our bees be healthy as possible. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Don't forget to check out my other videos about foundationless beekeeping and your first month as a beekeeper.